Hey everyone! Before we get started, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Alright, let's jump into today's video. The case of Megan Louise Rose. The sun had barely crept over the horizon when the lifeless body of Megan Louise Rose was discovered at the base of Point Cartwright Cliffs. July 18, 1997. The sharp morning light cast long shadows over the jagged rocks in the sea below, whispered secrets to the shore. Secrets that would remain buried for nearly 3 decades. Her car, parked neatly nearby, suggested a tragic end. A young woman driven to despair. The authorities ruled it as suicide. Megan Louise Rose was a 25-year-old dedicated nursing assistant specializing in disability and aged care. Friends described her as a compassionate, full of life, and deeply committed to her work in Markula, Queensland. Megan resided at Unit 3 of 51 Keith Royal Drive, Markula, with her Delaware facto partner, then 45-year-old Keith Lees, and his young son. Megan was reported to have left the unit in her vehicle at approximately 8 p.m. on the July 17, 1997, a day before the unfortunate discovery. Police initially believed she had taken her own life due to a high blood alcohol concentration, but her family never believed it. They insisted Megan wasn't the kind of person to take her own life. And as the years ticked by, the cracks in that ruling grew impossible to ignore. In February 2009, the Queensland Police reopened Megan's case, suspecting there was more to her death than met the eye. New evidence surfaced. Evidence that cast doubt on the original suicide ruling. Investigators discovered that Lee had allegedly taken out a life insurance policy in Megan's name shortly after her death. Combined with inconsistencies in the initial forensic reports, the case was reclassified as suspicious. Then in February 2022, there was a fresh investigation by cold case detectives. The following year, they announced a $500,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Homicide detectives visited a home in Victoria in June of 2023 to speak with Lees, then aged 70, concerning their investigation. A day later, Lees had disappeared, with his car found abandoned in Portland. But he didn't disappear into the wilderness. He disappeared into society. Under the alias David, Lees crisscrossed Australia, slipping through the cracks of the system with falsified documents, a driver's license, and a pensioner card. He collected government welfare and enjoyed the comforts of subsidized housing. Even religious groups, unaware of the man's dark past, offered him shelter and support. Lees evaded justice, but he couldn't run forever. In July of 2023, police issued Lees an arrest warrant and continued searching for him. He was spotted on CCTV around Victoria in the ensuing days. Authorities said at the time, Lees may have been seeking casual work in the farming and fruit-picking industries. The public was warned not to approach him. While on the run, members of Lees' family publicly appealed for him to turn himself in, expressing concern for both his well-being and the need for justice for Rose's family. Due to the police's effort in seeking the help of the public, someone, somewhere, listening to a true crime podcast recognized David as Keith Lees. One anonymous tip. And just like that, the man who had eluded authorities for decades was finally within reach. After 18 months of evading authorities, Lees was arrested at a property on Kenthurst Road in Doral, New South Wales on January 2, 2024. During his arrest, he allegedly assaulted a police officer, biting them, a final desperate act of defiance from a man who had spent years avoiding accountability. In New South Wales, Lees faced charges related to identity fraud and assault after he allegedly bit a police officer during an encounter with law enforcement. These charges were later withdrawn to facilitate his extradition back to Queensland. Following his extradition, Lees appeared in Gord, where he faced charges for the alleged murder of Megan Louise Rose. His case is expected to continue through the legal system as authorities seek justice for the long unsolved crime. Queensland Police's reward offer of $500,000 is still standing. So if someone has more information regarding this case, Please inform the authorities. The case of Joanne Nelson. Before Paul met Joanne, he had been in serious relationships with women more than once. For example, in 1993, during his university years, he was with Carrie Thompson. Although he didn't stay with her for long, this relationship revealed his violent tendencies. Carrie told the police about how Paul could switch during an argument and become aggressive, beating the walls and holding Carrie by force. This was just the beginning. In 1999, Jenny Mary Clark appeared in his life. They wasted no time, and just 2 weeks after meeting, the wedding bells were already ringing. However, their marriage began with a real nightmare. On their wedding night, Paul attacked Jenny, and this was not a one-off incident. He continued to beat her and even strangled her into unconsciousness. Investigators claimed that this abusive behavior was repeated with Joanne. Despite this situation, Paul and Jenny decided to have a baby. Their daughter, Chloe, was born in 2000, and they divorced shortly after. When Chloe was 5 years old, Jenny met Joanne and immediately realized that Joanne was too naive for such a rude man and would face a tough battle with Paul. In February 2002, he broke up with Jenny and began dating Joanne Nelson. Katie, Joanne's sister, said that Joanne most likely did not know about his criminal history. Otherwise, she would not have continued the relationship or wanted children with him. Their story began on the streets where Paul worked as a security guard in bars and clubs. He was 27 and already experienced in relationships, while Joanne was just starting her journey into adulthood at the age of 19. Despite the age difference, they found support in each other, running away from their parents' control and looking for their own space. They lived with Paul's mother, and then they could afford to buy their own house. But happiness was slowly disappearing, fading away like smoke from a fire. The days turned gray and the tension grew between them. For Joe, and everything had become too mundane and boring. Their differences began to affect the relationship. She loved order while he did not give it much thought. On February 14, 2005, Joanne did not come to work. This was unusual and caused immediate concern as the investigation revealed more and more information. The previously quiet and peaceful town was overtaken by a wave of shocking lies and deception. Joan Nelson, a cheerful and bright young woman, always put the happiness of her loved ones above her own. As a child, she lived with her parents in the town of Hull, also known as Kingston upon Hull, on the east coast of Yorkshire, England. Her mother, Jean, was a teaching assistant, and her father, Charlie, worked as an engineer for the city council. It was in this town that Joanne grew up and became who she was. Joanne had a bright personality and was successful both academically and socially. She was an active athlete who loved netball, lacrosse, and swimming. She lived happily, enjoying her youth, but always harbored a deep desire to create her own family. She initially tried her hand at medicine, but the emotional toll of being a nurse proved too difficult for her. Her loved ones remember how she would come home saddened by the suffering of her patients. Later, Joanne considered working abroad but ultimately chose to work at an employment center in Hull to be closer to her family and friends. She found fulfillment in making people's lives better by helping them find jobs and improve their skills. Joanne's dedication and kindness left a lasting impact on those around her, making her absence even more profound and alarming when she did not show up for work that fateful February day. On Valentine's Day 2005, Joanne Nelson vanished without a trace, turning a day meant for love into a day of horror and mystery. Her disappearance was a nightmare for her parents. When her boyfriend reported her missing to the police, a sense of foreboding filled the air. That night turned dark and ominous, leaving Joanne's family and friends enveloped in fear and uncertainty. Instead of enjoying the evening with his beloved, Paul found himself speaking with the police. He claimed that the last time he saw Joanne was when she was asleep, and upon his return from work, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving only shadows of fear and hope behind. At 22 years old, Joanne's sudden disappearance caused great distress among her loved ones. the situation became even more perplexing. When she missed significant events, such as her best friend's father's funeral and her sister Katie's 19th birthday, the police swiftly launched a large-scale search operation involving numerous law enforcement officers, military personnel, and volunteers. Joanne's father was vocal about his suspicions regarding Paul, questioning how he could be involved in the disappearance of such a responsible young woman. Katie, although aware of her father's concerns, found it hard to believe that Paul had any role in Joanne's vanishing. The family's worry and confusion only deepened as days turned into weeks without any sign of Joanne. Paul threw himself into the search efforts, collaborating with volunteers, concerned relatives, and friends. Despite lacking family consent, he granted multiple interviews to the press, keen to aid in the search. When questioned by a reporter over the phone, Paul vehemently denied any wrongdoing in Joanne's disappearance. He adamantly professed his love for her, asserting that he could never harm her. However, discrepancies emerged between his spoken words and his facial expressions. Expert Cliff Lansley scrutinized Paul's demeanor during a televised interview, identifying peculiarities. Notably, Paul failed to close his eyes while discussing Jo in an anomaly for someone grappling with grief. Moreover, he displayed no signs of tears, raising suspicions. Further scrutiny came from Ray Higgins, the head of the investigation team at Humberside Police. Higgins reported observing nail marks on the back of Paul's hand, leading authorities to consider his potential involvement in Joanne's disappearance or death. Eventually, Paul's mother, unable to bear the emotional turmoil any longer, divulged crucial information about Paul's actions to the authorities, potentially shedding light on Joanne's fate. Upon learning of the accusations, Paul didn't attempt to refute his culpability. Just 6 days after Joanne's disappearance, he found himself in police custody. During a grueling interrogation, the truth emerged. On that fateful Valentine's Day in February 2005, Paul committed the unthinkable act of ending Joanne's life in their own home. Paul recounted a tumultuous argument that escalated to irreparable heights. Joanne's constant criticism, particularly regarding household chores, served as the catalyst. According to Paul, Joanne's request for help with the washing machine triggered his anger and shame at his perceived inadequacy. Matters worsened when Joanne declared her intention to leave him and demanded the sale of their home for €110,000, further fueling Paul's rage. In a fit of fury, Paul confessed to the police, admitting to strangling Joanne with his bare hands. Subsequently, he displayed chilling composure as he meticulously orchestrated the aftermath, intending to conceal his heinous deed. He craftily devised a plan, seeking to fabricate Joanne's sudden disappearance. With calculated precision, Paul proceeded to carry out his scheme. He engaged in casual interactions with neighbors and discussed banal topics like acquiring a pet, all while concealing the darkness within him. Surveillance footage captured his unervingly composed demeanor as he purchased supplies, a testament to his disturbingly calm facade. Armed with garbage bags, rubber gloves, and disinfectant spray, executed his plan methodically. He bound Joanne's limbs, encased her in bags, and sealed them with duct tape. Then, without hesitation, he transported her lifeless body to her vehicle. His audacity matched only by the magnitude of his crime. The audacious act unfolded in broad daylight, revealing Paul's cunning and deceitful nature. With chilling composure, he concealed his heinous deed from unsuspecting onlookers, demonstrating his ability to manipulate those around him effortlessly. After concealing Joanne's lifeless body in her own vehicle, Paul embarked on a calculated journey. Driving approximately 75 miles to the remote Bradbury woodland near Winteringham in North Yorkshire, Paul carefully orchestrated each step. With meticulous precision, he carried Joanne's body through the dense forest, seeking a secluded burial site among the towering pines. Utilizing twigs to obscure the makeshift grave, Paul buried what he perceived as the love of his life. Returning to the victim's car, Paul resumed his facade of normalcy, showing no remorse or acknowledgement of his monstrous actions. He even fabricated a fake phone conversation with Joanne to divert suspicion, further highlighting his cold-blooded demeanor. Despite his attempts to deceive, Paul's consistent actions betrayed an alarming level of planning and premeditation. In the subsequent investigation, Paul's memory conveniently faltered regarding the exact location of Joanne's burial site. Detectives, led by the tenacious Ray Higgins, embarked on a painstaking 6-week search across 3 counties. Finally, on March 24th, after 39 days of agonizing uncertainty, the grim truth came to light. In a solemn operation led by Detective Phil Gadd, Joanne's remains were discovered in Bransby, New York. Trembling with nerves, the search party followed Paul's descriptions until they stumbled upon the telltale signs: a garbage bag concealed beneath branches. Within it lay the heartbreaking evidence: Joanne's body wrapped in plastic, a tragic confirmation of the family's worst fears. March 24th marked the end of a harrowing ordeal for Joanne's family, bringing closure to their anguished search while cementing the grim reality they had dreaded all along. Paul's facade of strength hid a dark history of sexual violence against women. A chilling truth kept hidden from Joanne's family and the public until the trial. During his time working as a security guard at the club, he ominously referred to himself as a psychopath, sending shivers down the spines of those who knew him. Witnesses familiar with Paul from the gym recounted instances where he instigated fights in clubs and bars, painting a disturbing picture of his character. As the trial unfolded, more unsettling details emerged. It was revealed that Paul had been experimenting with steroids in a misguided attempt to sculpt his physique into that of a bodybuilder. His friends disclosed that he had battled alcoholism in the past, and his violent outbursts were likely exacerbated by his steroid use. Paul's educational background provided little insight into the darkness lurking beneath his seemingly ordinary facade. He attended Sydney Smith School before enrolling at Howe College, where he successfully completed a program in constructional engineering. Despite his academic achievements, Paul's journey took a sinister turn when he pursued a degree in horticulture at Bishop Burton College, completing it at the tender age of 17. These revelations painted a chilling portrait of a man whose outward appearance belied the deep-seated demons lurking within. Paul's transformation from a seemingly ordinary student to a perpetrator of unspeakable violence left Joanne's family and the community reeling, grappling with the horrifying reality of the darkness that dwelled within him. Paul's journey through life took him from Saudi Arabia to Somerton Road, where he worked diligently in various industries alongside his father, Peter Dyson. Together, they navigated the maintenance industry, honed their gardening skills, and delved into the intricacies of machining. Paul's employment history painted a picture of a young man eager to carve out his path in the world of work. However, behind the veneer of normalcy lurked a disturbing truth. At the tender age of 15, Paul's life took a dark turn when he crossed paths with Colin Allen, a martial arts expert with whom he formed an unlikely bond. It was to Colin that Paul confessed to a heinous crime, a confession that ultimately led to his arrest. Paul's acquaintances shed light on his complex character. While some saw him as charming and attractive to women, others witnessed a more troubling side to his personality. He often leveraged his position as a security guard to forge connections with women from higher social echelons, revealing a distorted perception of himself and his interactions. Colleagues and relatives offered contrasting portraits of Paul, depicting him as both outspoken and boastful about his athletic prowess, yet also capable of making disturbing statements. Shockingly, Paul's family recounted instances where he proudly boasted about his father's involvement in the deaths of 2 individuals. This seemingly incredulous claim, however, proved to be rooted in reality. Paul's father, Peter Dyson, had indeed served time in prison for the manslaughter of 22-year-old John Dickinson, a man with whom his wife had been unfaithful. The tragic events of 1967 cast a shadow over Paul's upbringing, exposing him to the grim realities of life and death at a young age. Through Paul's tumultuous journey, a complex and unsettling portrait emerged, revealing the interplay between family history, personal choices, and the darkest depths of human nature. In 1974, a mere 2 days after Paul entered the world, tragedy struck with haunting consequences. Peter Dyson, his father, found himself entangled in a fatal accident. Behind the wheel, he collided with 47-year-old Gordon Kell, who was returning home after jubilantly celebrating a silver wedding anniversary. In a chilling turn of events, Peter fled the scene, leaving Gordon to perish on the roadside. Despite the gravity of the situation, Paul idolized his father, viewing him through a lens of admiration and heroism. The untimely demise of Peter in February, succumbing to a heart attack in the midst of their life in Saudi Arabia, left an indelible mark on Paul's psyche. It cast a shadow over his existence, shaping the trajectory of his fate in ways both profound and ominous. As the trial unfolded on November 7, 2005, a hushed courtroom bore witness to a startling revelation. Paul, in a dramatic turn of events, stunned onlookers by entering a guilty plea. Joanne's family, bracing themselves for a protracted and grueling legal battle, found themselves thrust into a realm of disbelief and uncertainty. In a moment of collective astonishment, they whispered affirmations as Paul's admission reverberated through the chamber. Throughout the proceedings, Paul maintained a stoic demeanor, his gaze fixed straight ahead or cast downward, deliberately avoiding the piercing stares of Joanne's grieving loved ones and the scrutiny of law enforcement. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his impassive countenance, not even during the formal announcement of the charges against him. His lawyer, Harry Barrell, stood before the court acknowledging the gravity of the situation. With unwavering resolve, he conceded that there could be no excuse for the heinous act perpetrated by his client. In the wake of Paul's shocking confession, a pall of solemnity descended upon the courtroom, marking the beginning of a harrowing journey toward justice and closure. On Tuesday, November 8th, nearly 10 months after the tragic murder, Paul received his sentence, life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Remarkably, just 14 years later, in November 2019, at the age of 45, Paul found himself transferred to an open prison and recommended for day release. The parole board cited Paul's active engagement in self-awareness programs and successful completion of an intensive interpersonal relationship improvement program. Recalling the day of Joanne's disappearance, Katie was struck by Paul's behavior. She now regrets offering him comfort when he appeared at her doorstep. Later, when Paul wandered off, Katie, consumed by worry, searched for him. Finding him at the bus stop, she squeezed his hands in an attempt to provide support as he sat there, overcome with emotion. She even embraced him, hoping to offer solace. Reflecting on the moment, admitted she hadn't initially noticed the scratches on his arm, but upon later reflection, she couldn't forgive herself for missing them. The easing of Paul's detention conditions and the prospect of day release stirred deep emotional turmoil within Joanne's family. Katie, speaking to the media, expressed their sense of loss and confusion in the face of this news. Paul's impending release dredged up painful memories of Joanne's untimely death, leaving the family grappling with a sense of injustice, despite their belief that Paul didn't deserve such leniency for his heinous actions. The case of Jodine Sarin. Jodine Sarin was 39 years old when her parents, Art and Lois Sarin, went to visit her at her condo on Valentine's Day in February 2007. Although Jodine had a mental disability, she managed to live on her own, but still needed regular check-ins from her parents. That evening, when the Sarons arrived, they noticed the lights inside were on. However, they couldn't enter because the front door was secured with a safety chain. After calling out to Jodine and getting no response, Art forced the door open. He walked into Jodine's darkened bedroom and was surprised to find an unidentified man having sex with his daughter. Art told the man to get dressed and leave. The parents waited in the living room to allow their daughter a moment of privacy. They expected an embarrassed couple to exit the bedroom, but no one did. After several minutes had passed, the Sarons returned to the bedroom and were treated to a horrifying sight. Jodine's lifeless nude body was now lying on the bed. She had been beaten and strangled to death. Incredibly, Jodine's killer had been brazen enough to quietly sneak out of the condo before they discovered what he had done. Investigators later found that she had been dead for between 12 and 24 hours. Police have no leads, but they do have a complete genetic profile from DNA collected at the scene. A $52,000 reward is being offered for information that leads to an arrest in the case. In early 2017, Parabon Nanolabs applied their advanced technology, typically costing about $4 per scan, to analyze the DNA found at the crime scene using a cutting-edge method called phenotyping. This state-of-the-art process interprets genetic material to predict physical characteristics of the individual, such as skin tone, eye and hair color, gender, ancestry, and facial structure. It can even determine whether the person has freckles. According to the phenotyping results, the man who killed Jodine Sarin had very fair skin, green or blue eyes, blonde or brown hair, and some freckles. Investigators believe the suspect is likely in his 40s and of Northern European ancestry. Based on the eyewitness account provided by Jodine's father on the night of the murder, the suspect was described as a burly man with a flabby stomach and messy hair. Forensic evidence suggests the killer stood between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet tall. Despite the advanced tools and information gathered, the perpetrator of this horrific crime has yet to be brought to justice. The case of Richard and Cassandra Haley. On April 19, 1988, 20-year-old Richard Keith Hall, who went by his middle name, picked up 18-year-old Cassandra Lee Haley from her home in Grafton, Virginia. The two planned to spend the evening together, heading to a movie theater in Keith's red 1982 Toyota. Afterward, they attended a party at the University Square Apartments, which was near their shared school, Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. They were last seen leaving the party around 1:30 a.m. as Cassandra had a 2 a.m. curfew. However, no one saw them after they left the building, and no one knew where Keith had parked his car. There were no witnesses to the couple entering the vehicle, leaving the events of their night a complete mystery. Keith's Toyota was found abandoned the next morning at 7 a.m., but it wasn't reported to law enforcement until 9 a.m. The car was located at the York River Overlook on Colonial Parkway in Yorktown, Virginia. The Colonial Parkway is a scenic route stretching 23 miles through several Virginia cities, including Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown. At the time of the couple's disappearance, it was suspected to be the hunting ground of a serial killer. Because of this, many, including Keith's friends and family, found it strange that his vehicle was discovered there. Keith was known to avoid this route, especially at night. Initially, nothing seemed off about the 20-year-old Toyota. The keys were in the ignition and there were no signs of blood or disturbance. However, a watch and a pair of eyeglasses were found on the car's dashboard. It's unclear who the items belonged to, as neither Keith nor Cassandra were known to wear glasses. Upon further inspection, law enforcement noticed something unusual. Most of Keith's clothing, including his underwear, was found in the back of the car, along with most of Cassandra's clothing, including her underwear. Also left behind were Keith's wallet, which contained at least $20, Cassandra's handbag, and 3 shoes. One belonging to the 18-year-old girl was missing. Initially, investigators thought that the couple had gotten undressed to go swimming, but it ended up drowning. However, a search of the nearby river turned up nothing, and loved ones noted that Cassandra was afraid of water. However, scent dogs did pick up the couple's trail leading down a steep 25-foot embankment to a small beach below. Despite this, the canines lost the trail, and an examination of the area with divers and officers on foot turned up no evidence and no leads. State police helicopters joined in the search but found nothing. Meanwhile, the couple's families issued flyers throughout the states and offered a reward of $11,000 for information, but none of the tips they received panned out. Cassandra's family searched the nearby woodland in the following weeks, but found no trace of her or her companion. As there was no blood, no sign of a struggle, and no physical evidence, authorities were left completely stumped with more questions than answers. Had the car been dumped here by the perpetrator? Where were the couple? Or what remained of them? Why was their clothing folded up? Why was it left behind in the place? And if the car had been dumped, why did the perpetrator choose this location? These questions remain unanswered. Despite the years that have passed since the disappearance of Keith and Cassandra, little new information or evidence has come to light. Keith, a typical student with an interest in computing, had no known enemies. He met Cassandra in a math class, and their date on the night they disappeared was there. It's been reported that Keith had recently broken up with his girlfriend of 4 years. Although another source suggests the 20-year-old was just on a break from his long-term partner. More recently, it has been speculated that the students may have fallen victim to the serial killer previously mentioned. Between 1986 and 1989, 3 young couples, all of whom were university students, were found dead in the Colonial Parkway area. In all cases, their cars had been abandoned and their possessions left behind. However, if the pair are victims of the Colonial Parkway serial killer, then they are the only ones whose bodies have never been recovered. It has been suggested that the perpetrator posed as a law enforcement officer so they could get close to their victims. The slayings in the area stopped abruptly after 1989, however, leading some to believe that the culprit either died or went to prison. Others have theorized that the perpetrator was a worker at the CIA training grounds in Camp Peary, which can be found nearby. It's been suggested by online sleuths that the slaying stopped because the worker was transferred to another location. A retired homicide detective has suggested that the killings are not linked and are the work of separate people. However, all of these ideas are just theories and nothing more. Given Keith's knowledge of the previous murders and his reluctance to drive through the Colonial Parkway area, some have speculated that perhaps whatever happened to the couple took place along Route 17 and that the car had been dumped at the Colonial Parkway, possibly to throw off investigators. Other armchair detectives have proposed the idea that the couple's bodies were dumped into the York River and carried into Chesapeake Bay, never to be found. The case has not been easy for the couple's loved ones. Of course, someone disappearing is a horrific thing to have to deal with. But Cassandra's family also voiced their concerns that not enough was done in the investigation. In February 2018, they said they had felt abandoned by the FBI, who had primary jurisdiction because Keith's vehicle was found on federal property. The family noted that the authorities were more interested in arguing with one another over who had jurisdiction and that they failed to share information with each other, something that may have hindered the case. Meanwhile, Keith's father died in 1996 and his mother in February 2001. His siblings continued to look for answers. Richard Keith Cole and Cassandra Lee Haley were both seen alive at around 1:30 on the morning of April 10, 1988. They had attended a party at the University Square Apartments in Newport News, Virginia. Keith is a white male with light brown hair and blue eyes, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing around 150 pounds when he was last seen. He was wearing a gray and brown cardigan, a white polo shirt, 2-tone brown dress slacks, and leather shoes. Cassandra is a white female with brown hair and brown eyes. She is 5 feet 7 inches and weighed approximately 135 pounds when last seen. She has 3 piercings in her left ear and 2 in her right. At the time of her disappearance, Cassandra was wearing a long-sleeve rust-colored turtleneck with a white blouse over it, stonewashed jeans, and a 1987 Tabs high school class ring. She may go by the nicknames Sandra, Sandy, Missy, or Cassie. If they are alive today, Keith would be 53 years old and Cassandra 52. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Keith and Cassandra or their whereabouts, you can contact the Virginia State Police Department at 8046742000. The case of Eva Blanco. Eva Blanco was born on February 17, 1981 in Spain. Her father is Manuel Blanco and her mother is Olga Puig. In 1997, Eva's family moved to Alguit, a small city near Madrid. They chose this place to enjoy a peaceful life away from the hustle and bustle of the capital. Of the three sisters, Eva, Rebecca, and Maria, Eva is known as the quietest girl when she is with her close friends and relatives. However, Eva always radiates as a cheerful, trustworthy, and wonderful companion. She is also very active in sports activities, and this passion brings Eva endless joy and happiness. At school, she is admired by many people for her charm and warm, friendly personality. Eva is a good example for her younger sisters and is a responsible girl. She always followed all the rules set by her parents, including the curfew, so that they did not have to worry or be upset. However, on a fateful day, things did not go as planned. On the afternoon of April 19th, Eva and her friends were playing tennis, enjoying the carefree moments of youth. They had no idea that this seemingly normal afternoon would soon turn dark and sad. On Saturday evening, as the sun set, they decided to go to a local disco to enjoy their strong friendship and spend time together until late at night. Eva asked her mother for permission to come home later than usual. Olga, seeing that her daughter was always responsible, agreed to let Eva stay until midnight before going home. It was late at night and the clock struck 11:30 p.m. One by one, the group said goodbye to each other and returned home, including Eva. Little did she know that her journey home would lead to dangerous mysteries. Eva and her friend decided to take a shortcut through a vacant lot to get home faster. It was a route she had taken many times before, but fate had other plans for her. At 11:45 p.m., they parted ways and Eva began walking through the familiar dark vacant lot. As midnight approached, Eva's mother became worried that her daughter had not returned home. She contacted Eva's friends for information, but they said they had split up and that Eva was supposed to be home by then. This made her even more worried. She decided to alert her husband, a tow truck driver, who soon began searching for Eva in town. They were joined in the search by their nephew, a local police officer, and the father of one of Eva's friends. At 1 a.m., Eva's parents reported their daughter missing to the local civil police station. However, they were disappointed by the lack of interest shown by the police, who took just over an hour to file a missing persons report. The police downplayed the seriousness of the situation, suggesting that children Eva's age were often on drugs and that she might be lying in a doorway or on the sidewalk. This clearly implied that they were not taking the search for her seriously. During the night, Eva's father visited the local civil police station 15 times. He was extremely frustrated and criticized the agency for not quickly organizing a search for Eva. He accused the civil police of neglecting their duties. However, the police denied this and explained that according to normal procedure, they would wait several hours before starting a search for a missing person. Meanwhile, Eva's father was still worried and hoping that his daughter would return safely. However, the real reason behind this delay remains unclear. Adding to the uncertainty and despair, the search for Eva began at 2:30 a.m. Family, friends, and authorities searched the town and surrounding area. However, the police did not file a missing persons report until 8 a.m. By noon, Eva's family had contacted local television station Telemadrid, asking them to report on the incident. At 9 a.m., Eva's body was discovered by two elderly people 6 kilometers from the town of Algeb, near a road construction site connecting Cabina and Belvis de Jarama. This area is often chosen by young couples for private rendezvous in their cars. Initially, the discoverers suspected a serious traffic accident, thinking that she had been run over. However, when the police arrived, they discovered a much more horrifying truth. Eva had been brutally murdered lying face down on the ground with multiple stab wounds. She was wearing jeans, a dark sweater, and hiking boots, the same clothes she had worn on the day of her disappearance. A sleeve of her jacket was missing, indicating a violent struggle. Investigators believe both Eva and her killer arrived at the scene by car. However, heavy rain overnight washed away tire tracks and other vital forensic evidence. Despite the difficulties, investigators discovered Eva's faint footprints and a crucial clue, the footprints of a man wearing size 42 moccasins. The findings offered hope for justice for the innocent victim. The Blanco family was notified by the police of the discovery of Eva's body. According to the autopsy report, Eva was stabbed 19 times in the back and died of blood loss at around 4 a.m. The weapon was a Navaja knife, 8 to 10 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide. Eva's death was a heartbreaking tragedy for the community. The attack began while the victim was still in the car and continued as she tried to escape up the side of the road. The wounds, especially to the ear and the back of the head, showed the brutal nature of the crime. The wound was severe enough to cause death. Forensic evidence showed that the victim was also physically assaulted. DNA samples from the same attacker were found on the victim's body and clothes, proving this barbaric crime. The discovery of a red cloth in the victim's mouth was determined to be from a regular car seat cover. This suggests that EVA was taken into the car after being kidnapped. This detail reflects the painful final moments of the innocent victim. However, since the body was found fully clothed and there were no obvious signs of violence, investigators and police initially thought it might have been a consensual sexual encounter that led to a dispute. They did not agree with the view that Eva committed suicide. The police expected the case to be solved quickly. They suspected that an acquaintance of Eva's offered to drive her and took her to a secluded place, a popular spot for couples, where the tragedy occurred. Police initially suspected Eva's ex-boyfriend Infante El Saiz, but he was cleared after questioning. The investigation then focused on men known to Eva's family, specifically people she might have trusted enough to take a ride with. Nevertheless, as the case became more complex, police could not dismiss the possibility that the perpetrator was a complete stranger. But Eva's friends were adamant that she would never take a ride with a stranger and believed that she had been forced into the car. Adding to the mystery, some neighbors linked the incident to an unknown blue car that was seen in town around midnight following another girl. The driver was described as a blonde man in his 20s. Unfortunately, no one recorded the license plate number, leaving a vital clue in the case untraceable. During the investigation, investigators discovered unidentified male bodily fluids on Eva's body and clothing. However, this information was kept secret and not disclosed to Eva's family or the public. Simultaneously, the police secretly collected DNA samples from men who were related to or knew Eva to compare with the DNA found in the fluids. Eva's father, Manuel's DNA was taken from a cigarette he had smoked while drinking coffee and discussing the case with the police. Other samples were discreetly collected from alcohol tests or from cups used by the suspect in a bar. Although no matches were found, the civil defense police still believe that the perpetrator is an adult male living in Algit or the surrounding areas. The investigation continues while Eva's family yearns to find out the truth. 8 months after Eva died in a tragic incident, her mother found 2 secret diaries in her daughter's room. The diaries were dated 1995 to 1996 and 1996 to 1997, in which Eva recorded details of her daily life up until the day she was murdered. Most of the entries revolved around Eva and her ex-boyfriend Miguel. Their names were repeatedly written in different colors of ink throughout the pages. Near the end of the book, Miguel's name was suddenly replaced by the number 343110, while Eva's name remained the same. Despite many attempts to decipher the meaning of this number, no one has found a satisfactory explanation. The true meaning of the number remains a mystery, leaving Eva's family and investigators haunted by this puzzling clue. After Manuel's DNA was ruled out as that of a suspect, he launched a campaign calling on Algit residents to voluntarily provide DNA samples to help with the investigation. With the mayor's support, in November 1999, an official notice was issued asking all males over the age of 16, about 5,000 people, to provide hair or saliva samples. However, Spanish judicial authorities rejected the proposal, considering it naive, inappropriate, and useless. Additionally, it could stigmatize those who refuse to provide DNA, a legal right without a court order. They also believed that the perpetrator would not voluntarily provide his DNA sample. Eva's father collected 2013 DNA samples from residents of Algiers and surrounding towns and sent them to the local court for a decision. The judge requested an opinion from the Madrid chief prosecutor on the legality of the testing. On March 30, 2000, the chief prosecutor stressed that only those suspected in the investigation should be tested, not all volunteers. Consequently, only 45 samples were tested, including 12 from Eva's relatives, acquaintances, and people with criminal records, especially cases involving sexual crimes and knife violence. Time passed and the case went cold. But the turning point of the case occurred when a woman reported to the authorities that she saw a suspicious man at the construction site around 8 a.m. Before Eva's body was found, the man was sloppily dressed, walking in the rain without an umbrella, looking as if he had been up all night and appeared to be searching for something before getting into a white Renault 18. Police considered her testimony credible as several other witnesses had also reported seeing the Renault 18 matching the fibers found on Eva's body. On October 28, 2013, police released a sketch of the suspect made with the cooperation of a new witness. The man was described in 1997 as being about 35 to 40 years old, 170 to 180 centimeters tall, weighing 75 to 80 kilograms, obese, with short brown hair, a square face, hard features, and deep-set eyes. He was wearing a white shirt, a V-neck sweater, and was driving a white Renault 18 with red upholstery. A secret telephone number and email address were set up to collect information, receiving 100 emails by January 1, 2014. In late 2013, the investigation took a major step forward when DNA from the fluid suggested the suspect was of North African origin. Police asked 300 North African men who had lived in Algiers in 1997 to volunteer their DNA samples. A former neighbor of Eva's, now living in the south of France, had a close match to the killer, suggesting the DNA in question could belong to the neighbor's sibling. Subsequent DNA analysis revealed a man named Ahmed Chell. On October 1, 2015, Ahmed was arrested outside his workplace in Villemale, France in a joint operation by the civil police and the French gendarmerie. Ahmed Chell was born on March 1, 1963 in Taza, Morocco. He married a 20-year-old Spanish woman in 1989 in Madrid and became a Spanish citizen in the 1990s. They had one child and Eva was 5 months pregnant when Ahmed's wife was murdered. They were not registered residents in Algiers because they lived in the truck of Ahmed's employer, where he worked as a delivery man, about 4 kilometers from the scene of the crime. In 1999, the Chells moved to France, where they separated amicably but were still listed as married in Spain. In February 2003, Ahmed remarried a young Moroccan woman who lived near the Swiss border and had children. He worked as a welder on agricultural machinery but struggled with relationships with his colleagues. When confronted with DNA evidence, Ahmed claimed that 2 unidentified men had taken him to Eva's body and forced him to touch her. However, his ex-wife denied this, telling reporters that Ahmed had actually gone out with his brothers, as they often did on weekends. She revealed that one of the brothers had said he had been at the same club as Eva and had spoken to her after she had a fight with her ex-boyfriend. Eva returned to the club at 11 p.m. with friends instead of her brothers. Ahmed's ex-wife said that she and her brothers had not been questioned by the police. She denied that Ahmed was abusive but admitted he was aggressive when drunk. Female colleagues and clients found Ahmed unapproachable, aggressive when drunk, and unsuitable for women. Eva's family had little contact with Ahmed's brother and had not met Ahmed. On October 5, 2015, Ahmed attempted suicide but failed, after which he agreed to be deported to Spain for trial. At a hearing on October 13th, he remained silent but provided DNA. He was detained until DNA testing confirmed his involvement. In January 2016, the prison psychiatric unit removed Ahmed's anti-suicide measures. Ahmed claimed he had been forced to touch Eva, denied any penetration, but could not explain why his bodily fluids were present in her genital area. On January 29, 2016, Ahmed was found dead in his cell, having committed suicide by hanging himself with his shoelaces. The trial officially ended on February 15, 2016. Eva's family, despite finding their daughter's killer, were disappointed that he was not held accountable for his brutal actions. However, they believe that justice will be served in the afterlife. Eva's story is a journey to find justice after loss. The community unites to find answers for the young girl whose life was taken. The case of the Salomon family. By all accounts, the Salomon family appeared to be an ordinary, hardworking, and well-liked family in their Northridge, Los Angeles, California neighborhood during the 1980s. Sol Salomon, originally from Israel, and his wife, Elaine, met and married in the United States in the 1970s. Together, they bought a home on Lassen Street in LA, where they lived with Elaine's 15-year-old daughter, Michelle, and their 9-year-old son, Mitchell. Sol ran his own business that involved maintaining, repairing, and refilling fire extinguishers, overseeing a team of 4 employees. Elaine was a stay-at-home mom, and the couple also owned several rental properties. The Salomon family was last seen on October 12, 1982. However, their disappearance wasn't reported until 2 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed the pool at their home was overflowing and could not get in touch with anyone in the family. Sol's employees and their loved ones also began expressing concern at this time. When local police officers arrived at the scene, they discovered the family dog still leashed outside. The doors were locked, so authorities had to force their way inside. Once inside, everything appeared quiet and undisturbed, with no signs of a struggle. However, no one was present. Valuable items, including $2,500 in cash, jewelry, and electronics, had been left behind. 2 of the family's 3 vehicles were still parked in the driveway. Elaine's Rolls-Royce and Sol's work truck were untouched, but their Mercedes was missing. During a further investigation, officers found a small amount of blood and blood splatter in Michelle's bedroom, with traces on both the mattress and the wall. A piece of carpet had been removed from the floor and was covered with a bathroom rug, and the 15-year-old's bedsheets, duvet, and pillows were gone. Outside of this, however, there were no clues about what had happened to the family or where they might be. Authorities also struggled to find a motive for the possible killings, as after speaking with Israeli officials to gather more information on Sol, it was discovered the 35-year-old had no criminal record and was not associated with crime in any way. He came from a steady background and had served as a police officer and spent time in the military. Elaine had no criminal history either. In the days following the disappearance on October 17th, the wallets and passports of Elaine and Sol were discovered on a stretch of highway known as the Antelope Valley Freeway near Acton, California, about 29 miles from Lane. There are mixed reports about whether or not the children's passports were also found here. Despite this evidence, no more leads surfaced in the case for several weeks, and locals began to speculate and gossip. Rumors circulated that Sol was involved with the Israeli mafia, which operated out of the LA area, although friends and family heavily denied these allegations. Soon, the police told media outlets that they were familiar with Sol and had been even before his disappearance. However, they declined to elaborate further, adding only that he had not been linked with criminal activity. For many, this was a bizarre statement to make, and many online sleuths have wondered how exactly Sol was known to authorities, speculating that perhaps he was an informant. However, there is no evidence to support this idea. A year passed with no progress on the case. In October of 1983, a man named Ashley Paul came forward to police after a private investigator working for Elaine's mother encouraged him to do so. The man, who worked as a cab driver in London, told the LAPD that he had seen his cousin, a man named Harvey Rader, shoot Sol in the head on October 12th of 1982. Rader was not unknown to police. A British citizen, Rader had moved to the US in 1978. Back in his home country, He had countless run-ins with authorities under his belt and had gone to prison 9 times. He had been convicted of over a dozen crimes ranging from armed robbery to theft and forgery to the unlawful possession of a firearm. Upon arriving in the United States, Sol had claimed he had no criminal record. But it wasn't until a few years later that authorities uncovered his extensive criminal history. On the night of the family's disappearance, Sol had planned to meet with Rada, a man with whom he shared an interest in restoring vintage vehicles. Rada owned and operated a car repair business. Around 6 p.m., Sol was known to have left the house to attend a car auction with Rada. But the auction had actually ended by 5 p.m. that evening. According to Rada, he dropped Sol off at an Israeli restaurant afterward, but investigators found that the restaurant was not open that night. After parting ways with Sol, Rada claimed he returned to the Salomon family home to drop off Sol's truck and pick up his Mercedes, which needed repairs. While this may have seemed plausible, a friend of Elaine's later testified in court that she had ended a phone call with Elaine around 1:30 p.m. because Rada was at the door. It appears Rada was the last person to see the family alive. Reports also indicated that Sol had invested around $20 into Rada's business. It was speculated that the pair fought on October 12th because he was unhappy with the details of the venture and wanted his money back. Sol told at least one person about this fight. Returning to the story of Rada's cousin, Paul claimed that after Rada shot Sol dead, he went to the Salomon home to take the lives of the remaining family members because they knew that Sol and Rada had been together on the day of his disappearance. Afterwards, the bodies had been removed from the house and wrapped in bedsheets and placed in the family's Mercedes. Following their deaths, Paul stated that he helped Rada bury the bodies in a desert area near Acton. Paul demanded that he be given immunity in exchange for his testimony. Although many members of law enforcement believed he was more involved in the murders than he let on. After failing 4 separate polygraph tests, the police rescinded his immunity offer and he was charged as an accessory to murder. The charges were eventually dropped and Paul returns to England where he refused to return to the US and rejected the idea of testifying against his cousin. Despite this and despite Rada denying any knowledge of the crimes, the police built a timeline of the fights Sol and Rada had and the subsequent threats that were made by Rada against Sol afterwards. And eventually, despite a lack of evidence and bodies, he was charged with the murders of the Salomon family. Rader was arrested in Arizona in 1988 following his release from prison for passport fraud. Rader's 2 trials ended in a mistrial. During his prosecutors claimed that the motive for Sol's murder stemmed from the $20,000, which the 35-year-old wanted back. Their evidence was limited. They knew Sol and Rada were together on the night of the disappearances. And as mentioned before, Elaine's friend testified that the mother of 2 had hung up because Rada had come to the door. Rada also had scratches on his forearms, which were thought to be from his victims fighting him off, and witnesses placed him in Elaine's Rolls-Royce on the day of the crime. However, 3 witnesses for the defense claimed that they saw Sol in the city of Carpinteria, California in the days following the disappearances. One of the witnesses was a civilian dispatcher for the Carpinteria PD who saw him in a pharmacy. The pharmacist working the counter corroborated this sighting. The defense also said that Sol and Elaine were having marital troubles at the time the family vanished, and alleged that the 35-year-old was involved with illegal drug and firearm trades. The jury deliberated for 2 days before acquitting Rada in July of 1992. Following his exoneration, he continued to maintain his innocence and sold his story, hoping it would be turned into a made-for-TV movie. The disappearance of the Salomon family is still unsolved. Although Ashley Paul attempted to lead authorities to the family's burial sites in the California desert, he could not locate it. No evidence of the family has been found in the years since Rader's and final trial. Rader's whereabouts in recent years are unclear. Although he wished to remain in the US where he had a son and an ex-wife, he was in the country illegitimately. And at one point officials did consider deporting him. In the years prior to the vanishing of Sol and his family, Rada had been the prime suspect in the disappearances of 3 other people, 47-year-old Joan Davis and her husband 54-year-old Peter were last seen in Los Angeles on March 17th of 1982. They were both British citizens and had reportedly had business dealings with Radha before they vanished. Authorities believe that the three of them had engaged in some kind of business-related dispute. Several months before this, a Burbank businessman named Ron Adib went missing after he left for a meeting with Radha. In both of these cases, the victims' vehicles were found in the LAX car park following their disappearances. However, Radha has never been charged or convicted in either of these vanishings. The Salmons family case leaves far more questions than answers. How was the perpetrator able to control the entire family well enough to carry out the killings? Was Saul working as an informant? How did the police know of Saul? How was the family able to afford a Rolls-Royce? A car known for its exorbitant price tag? The house was almost immaculate. How was the culprit able to keep the house so neat and tidy during the presumed murders? It has been theorized that Saul had taken his family with him on the run from some dangerous people. But they were caught while fleeing. This is why their passports and wallets were found along the highway. However, one officer involved in the case told LA Magazine that he suspected the evidence had been planted to mislead investigators. He believed the perpetrators took the bodies in the opposite direction. The officer also pointed to Harvey Rader as the likely person responsible for the disappearances, describing him as a smart and cunning individual. In the same article, Michelle's best friend recalled an instance when her father came home visibly disturbed after Saul had shown him weapons he was trying to sell. In February, Elaine's mother expressed her belief that Saul was involved in illicit business dealings and that her daughter was unhappy in the marriage. However, without any bodies or a confession, the fate of the Salomon family remains a mystery. If you have any information regarding their disappearance, you can contact the LAPD's non-emergency line at 7070273. Thank you so much for watching and exploring these cold cases with me. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to NA Cold Cases for more deep dives into the unsolved and unexplained.